Now let me tell you something about spring semester at Hargrove University. Everyone who survived fall comes back in January with this specific energy, the energy of people who have been through something and are pretending they haven't. The campus looks the same. The fountain is still there being ornamental and unapproachable. The ivy is still on the buildings doing its atmospheric best. The dining hall still serves the same scrambled eggs that taste like someone described eggs to a person who had never seen one, and then that person made them from memory. Everything looks the same. Nothing is the same. I know this because I am Nora, and I came back to spring semester carrying approximately 47 unresolved emotional situations in a backpack that was already too heavy, and I had exactly one plan: survive, study, and figure out what on earth was happening in my personal life without letting it affect my GPA, because my GPA was the one thing in my life that had never betrayed me, and I intended to keep it that way. The plan lasted until approximately the third day of the new semester, when I walked into my poetry elective and found Dorothy Ashford sitting in the second row. I stood in the doorway of that classroom for what a neutral observer would probably describe as an embarrassingly long time. Dorothy looked up from her notebook. Our eyes met. She had the expression of someone who had prepared for this moment and was executing the preparation. Composed. Steady. A very small, very careful, almost acknowledgement at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile and not quite an apology and was somehow both. I walked to a seat in the third row. One row behind her and 2 seats to the left. I put my bag down. I took out my notebook. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Then I sat there and thought about the fact that Dorothy Ashford was in my poetry elective, and also that she had kissed me 43 days ago, and I had said no, and we had not talked about it since, and now we were going to spend a semester writing poems about our feelings in the same room. I wrote one more thing in my notebook under the date. I wrote, "This is fine." I underlined it twice. I did not believe it for a single second. Welcome back to Daydream BL and GL. If you watched part 1 and you are back here, first of all, welcome back and I love you. Second of all, please subscribe right now if you haven't, because this part is going to require your full emotional preparation, and I need you locked in. Drop a comment and tell me you're here. Tell me your name. Tell me one thing you predicted about part 2, because I promise you got some of it right and most of it spectacularly wrong, and I want to know which. Let me back up 14 days to the beginning of January, because some things happened before the semester started that are essential to understanding the state of things when it did. Winter break at Hargrove in the dorms is a very specific experience. The campus empties out by about 80%, and what remains is a small population of students who, for various reasons, do not have somewhere else to be. We learn each other by proximity. We develop the kind of low-key community that forms when people stop performing and just exist in the same space without an audience. Lena was there for most of break, as promised. Her parents were in Seoul. We spent a significant portion of break in a state of something new and uncertain and genuinely good, studying together in the library, walking to the one coffee shop that stayed open, watching films on her laptop in the common room of Hendrix Hall while sharing a single blanket because the heating in Hendrix was theoretical at best. She brought snacks from the vending machine with the specific generosity of someone who is learning your preferences and filing them away. She showed up with a bag of pretzels one evening and said, "You mentioned once that you liked the kind with the extra salt," and she was right. I had mentioned it once, in passing, and she had remembered. I did not know what to do with a person who remembered things I said in passing. At St. Catherine's, being remembered was not exactly a daily occurrence. You learn to exist without expecting anyone to catalog your details. Lena cataloging my details was something I was still processing on a cellular level. On the 4th of January, she had been sitting beside me on the common room couch, her feet tucked under her, reading, and I had been doing the same, and at some point I had looked over at her and she had looked over at me, and there was a moment, a specific, charged, completely clear moment, where we both understood something without either of us having to perform understanding it. She took my hand. Very simply. Just reached over and put her hand over mine the way you do something you have been thinking about doing for long enough that when you finally do it, it is quiet rather than dramatic. I turned my hand over so our fingers linked. We went back to our books. It was genuinely, One of the most romantic things that has ever happened to me in my life, and it involved neither of us saying a single word. I think Sister Margaret would have found that either beautiful or confusing, and I genuinely cannot decide which. So that was where Lena and I were when January and the new semester arrived. Something new and careful and real. Something I was holding with both hands and also still figuring out how to hold correctly because I had no model for this, no template, no example from childhood of what it looked like when someone chose you and you chose them back and you both just stayed. I was learning. Lena was patient. And then the semester started and Dorothy Ashford was in my poetry class and I wrote "This is fine" in my notebook and underlined it twice, and you know the rest of that part. The poetry elective was taught by a professor named Dr. Osei, who was compact and energetic and had the teaching philosophy of someone who believed that every person in the room had a poem in them and his entire job was to create conditions uncomfortable enough that it came out. He announced this on the first day. He said, "Poetry is not decoration. Poetry is the thing you say when everything else has failed." He looked around the room when he said it. His eyes landed on me for a fraction of a second longer than was technically necessary, and I thought about 14 things at once. There were 16 students in the elective. I knew 3 of them. There was Dorothy in the second row. There was a girl from my economics class who nodded at me when I sat down. And there was a young man in the back corner who I did not know yet but who would, over the following weeks, become relevant in ways I was not anticipating. His name was Marcus. I noticed him the first day only in passing, tall, easy posture, the kind of face that looked like it was on the verge of finding something funny, warm brown eyes, and a notebook that was already half full before the semester even started, which told me he was a person who wrote things down. I approved of people who wrote things down as a general philosophical position. He noticed me noticing the notebook, and he held it up slightly, like a small acknowledgement. I looked back at the board. The first assignment Dr. Osei gave us was the one he called the unlocked room. He said, "Write a poem about something you have never said out loud. Not the polished version of the unsaid thing. The raw version. The one that lives in the part of your mind you do not usually invite visitors into." He gave us a week. He said we did not have to share in workshop unless we chose to. He said the only requirement was honesty. I stared at my notebook for most of that week. The problem was not that I had nothing to write about. The problem was the opposite. The unlocked room of my mind was so full of things I had never said out loud that I could not decide where to start, and every time I began something, another thing pushed it aside. And I ended up with 17 partial poems and a headache and 3 different pens that had run out of ink from all the crossing out. I know this because Lena watched me do this at our library table every evening that week, and at some point on Thursday night, she put her hand over my notebook and said, "What are you actually trying to say?" "I don't know," I said. "Yes, you do," she said. "I know too many things," I said. "The problem is selection." She looked at me with that round-eyed, careful expression. "Write the one that scares you most," she said. "That's the poem." I looked at her. "That's terrifying advice." "I know," she said. "Write it anyway." I wrote it that night after she went back to her dorm. I sat at the library table alone at 11 p.m., and I wrote the poem about St. Catherine's and the yellow blanket and the door it was left on and the woman who kept it in a box under her bed and never explained why. I wrote about growing up in a building full of people and learning very early that being surrounded was not the same as being held. I wrote it in one sitting without stopping and without crossing anything out, and when I finished I read it back and my handwriting was slightly shakier than usual in the last stanza, and I noticed that, but I did not address it because I was in a public library and there are standards. I submitted it to Dr. Osei's folder the next morning. What I did not know was what Dorothy was writing that same week in her own apartment, at her own table. I did not know any of that yet. That comes later. That comes in a way I was not ready for. Comment right now and tell me what you think Dorothy wrote about. I want your guesses. I want them in the comments before you keep watching because what actually happened is going to make the ones of you who get close feel very vindicated and the ones of you who don't feel very surprised. Go. Comment. I'll wait. Okay. Week 2 of the elective, Dr. Osei started workshopping. He picked 3 poems per session to read aloud and discuss. He did not say whose poems they were anonymous in workshop unless the writer chose to claim them. He read Dorothy's poem on the second workshop day. I did not know it was Dorothy's. Not while he was reading it. I was sitting in my third row seat with my notebook open doing what I always did in workshop, listening carefully, making notes, trying to identify what was working technically and what wasn't, because that is how I engage with things. Analytically first, and then emotionally once the analysis has created a safe container for the emotion. The poem Dr. Osei read was about a girl watching someone from a distance. About observing a life being built from nothing and feeling, instead of admiration, something uglier. Something that the poem described as recognizing a mirror you have been avoiding. About the specific cruelty of seeing someone uncomplicated by wealth, someone whose value was entirely their own, earned entirely by themselves, and responding to it with hostility, because uncomplicated things are threatening to people who are built entirely from complication. The poem ended with a single image, a door. A door that a person had closed from the outside and stood at afterward, hand on the wood, not knocking. Dr. Osei finished reading. The room was quiet for a moment. Whoever wrote this, he said, has done the hardest thing a poet can do. They've written about their own ugliness with precision and without self-pity. That's extremely difficult. That's the whole game, honestly. I was staring at my notebook. I had written 3 words during the reading and then stopped. The 3 words were, "Whose is this?" After class, I was packing up slowly. I tend to pack up slowly because it gives me time to process what just happened before I have to interact with the rest of the world, and I was aware of Dorothy near the front of the room doing the same. Most of the other students had filed out. Marcus was still in the back corner finishing a note. Dr. Osei had stepped out. "It was yours," I said. I wasn't looking at her. I was putting my notebook in my bag. A pause. "Yes," Dorothy said. I looked up then. She was holding her own notebook against her chest, spine outward, standing in the gap between the second-row desk and the wall. Her expression was the real one, the under-expression, the one I had learned to read over months of tutoring sessions and December library conversations. "The door," I said. "Yes," she said again. I thought about the door at St. Catherine's. The door the blanket had been left on. The door I had walked through on the way to becoming everything I currently was. I thought about the fact that Dorothy had listened to me talk about that door on a cold December evening and then gone home and written a poem about it. I did not have a response that was appropriate for a public classroom, so I said, "It was technically very good." Dorothy blinked. Then, very slowly, the corner of her mouth moved. "Thank you," she said. "That means a great deal." "Don't push it," I said. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. I left the classroom and walked into the hallway and stood for a moment against the wall just outside, breathing the slightly stale air of an academic building hallway, staring at the floor tiles, thinking about doors. Marcus came out behind me. He stopped when he saw me standing there. He looked at me. He looked at the classroom door. He looked back at me. "You okay?" he said. "Yes," I said. "You look like someone just handed you a math problem you weren't expecting," he said. "That's accurate," I said. He leaned against the wall beside me, comfortable in the way that some people are comfortable in hallways, like hallways are perfectly reasonable places to just exist. "Marcus," he said, extending a hand. "Nora," I said, shaking it. "I know," he said. "You're the one who color codes your notes. Dr. Alderman mentioned you in intro psych last semester." "Why was Dr. Alderman mentioning me in intro psych?" I said. "He used your note-taking system as an example of effective study methodology," Marcus said. "Without your permission, probably. But approvingly." I stared at him. "I'm going to have words with Dr. Alderman." "He meant it as a compliment," Marcus said. "I don't care," I said. "My notes are personal." Marcus grinned. It was the kind of grin that confirmed my earlier assessment of him, that he was perpetually on the verge of finding something funny. "You're very interesting," he said, not flirtatiously, just observationally, the way you'd say the weather is interesting or this film is interesting. "People keep saying that like it's a compliment," I said. "It is," he said. I looked at him. He seemed straightforward in a way that I did not have extensive experience with, people being straightforward without agenda, without performance, without the particular social calculations that I had become very good at reading. He just seemed like a person who was being a person. "I'll see you Thursday," I said. You will, he said, and pushed off the wall and walked down the hallway with the easy pace of someone who had somewhere to be and was in no particular rush to get there. I stood in the hallway for another moment. Then I went to find Lena. Lena was in the library, of course she was. She was always in the library. The library was essentially Lena's natural habitat, and I sat down across from her and put my bag on the table and said, "Dorothy wrote a poem about me." Lena looked up from her book very slowly. "Define about you," she said. I described the poem. Not all of it. The relevant parts. The door. The mirror. The distance and the hostility and what it was really about underneath. Lena was quiet for the length of time it takes to process something you already suspected and are now having confirmed. Then she said, "What did you say to her?" I told her it was technically very good, I said. Lena stared at me. "Nora." "What?" "It was. She wrote you a poem," Lena said, with a very patient tone of someone explaining something to a person who is being deliberately obstructive. "She wrote a poem about guilt and self-examination," I said. "It was for the assignment." "It was for you," Lena said. "Lena." "I'm not upset," she said, and she said it in the specific tone of someone who is being honest rather than protective, which was one of the things about Lena that I found both admirable and occasionally difficult to navigate. I need you to not pretend you don't know what it was." I looked at the table. I looked at my hands. I looked back at Lena. "I know what it was," I said quietly. "Okay," she said. And she picked up her book. And we sat in the library in the specific silence of two people who love each other and are both trying to be brave about something complicated and are mostly succeeding. After about 10 minutes, Lena said, without looking up from her book, "Is she a good poet?" "Yes," I said honestly. "Annoyingly good." "Of course she is," Lena said, turning a page. "Of course she's annoyingly good at that too." I laughed. I couldn't help it. And then Lena laughed too, and it was the complicated kind of laughing that sits right next to something that could be crying if you let it, and we laughed together over our books in the library, and it was one of the more human moments of my semester. Now I need to tell you about the thing that happened in the second week of February, because this is where part 2 stops being a romance story and becomes something with considerably higher stakes, and I need you fully awake for this. It started with a conversation at Quinn's. I was at the register on a Tuesday evening, slow hour, textbook open, pencil behind my ear, the general condition of a girl managing too many things simultaneously with great competence and mild internal chaos, when the door opened and the customer who came in was not a customer I expected. It was Dorothy. She looked around the store the way people look around places that are new to them, cataloging, adjusting. She was wearing a long coat, dark, her auburn hair down, and she had the expression of someone who had decided to do something and was committed to the decision even though it was slightly outside her comfort zone. She walked to the register. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. "Are you here to buy something or is this a social call? Because Mr. Quinn has a policy about loitering." "I'm here to buy something," she said, and picked up a packet of crackers from the display near the register. She put it on the counter. She looked at me. "And to talk to you." "Those are the crackers I eat on my break," I said. "You just bought my break crackers." "I'll buy you different crackers," she said. "Those are my preferred crackers." "Nora," she said. "Fine," I said. I rang up the crackers. She paid for them. She put them in her coat pocket, which meant technically they were hers now, and I would have to source alternative break crackers, which was a minor grievance I was filing internally for later. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. She said it the way she said most difficult things, directly, with the specific composure of someone who has rehearsed the opening sentence and is hoping the rest will follow. "About the alley. About why it happened." I put my pencil down. I gave her my full attention. And she told me. She told me about the USB drive. About taking it from her father's office by mistake, thinking it was her own backup drive with her coursework on it. About going out that October night. She had been at a dinner nearby, alone, which she did not explain and I did not ask about, and walking back toward campus. About the men appearing. About the wall. About all of it. She told me what was on the drive. What her father's company had covered up. A chemical leak at one of Ashford Energy's processing facilities in Georgia, 2019. Groundwater contamination affecting a small community. settled quietly with NDAs and payments, and a corporate communication strategy that kept it out of national news. The drive had documentation, internal memos, settlement figures. The name of the communications firm paid to manage the suppression. She told me all of this standing at the register of Quinn's Market on a Tuesday evening with a packet of my crackers in her coat pocket and the expression of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a long time and has finally decided to put it on a table. When she finished, I was quiet for a moment. Mr. Quinn had appeared in the back doorway at some point during this, and then very quietly disappeared again, which was exactly what I would expect from Mr. Quinn. "How long have you known what was on the drive?" I said. "Since November," she said. "I found the drive in my bag in October. I didn't look at it until November. I didn't know what to do with it." "Does your father know you have it?" I said. "He knows it went missing," she said. "He thinks it was lost. He doesn't know I have it, and I've looked at it. I processed this." "Dorothy," I said carefully. "The men in that alley were not random." "No," she said. "They weren't. Someone sent them." "Yes," she said. I think someone inside the company knows the drive exists. Someone who isn't my father. Someone who wants it handled before the investigation." She stopped. "There's a regulatory investigation." Quiet. "Into Ashford Energy's environmental compliance record. It started in November. I read about it in a filing." I stared at her. "You've been sitting on this since November." "I didn't know what to do," she said. The composure was still there, but underneath it was something that was tired in a very deep way. The tired that comes from carrying something alone for too long. I kept thinking I was overreacting. Or that I'd misread the files. Or that there was an explanation. She paused. "There isn't an explanation. I've read everything 3 times. What do you want to do?" I said. She looked at me with the real expression. "The full one." "The right thing," she said. "I just needed to tell someone first." I looked at her for a long moment. At the woman who had made my first semester a systematic exercise in controlled misery, who had written a poem about a door she stood outside of and didn't knock on, who was standing at my register with my crackers in her pocket and a corporate environmental cover-up on a USB drive, presumably somewhere in her expensive apartment, telling me she needed to do the right thing and had needed someone to tell first. "Do it," I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. "Once. Small. Definitive." "Also," I said. "My crackers." She reached into her pocket and put the crackers on the counter. "Sorry," she said. "You should be," I said, and opened the packet. Here is what I did not know was happening in the background while all of this was going on. Here is the thing that reconfigured everything when I found out. Here is the revelation, capital R, that made me sit down on a floor, not a bench, a floor. I had not made it to a bench, and stay there for a while. Dorothy had known who I was before the semester started. I found this out from the least expected source possible, which was Vivian Ashford. Vivian Ashford arrived on campus in the second week of February for a donor recognition event. The kind of event where significant contributors to the university come and stand in a room and are thanked in various formal ways while eating food that is considerably better than anything available in the dining hall. I was not supposed to be at this event. I was nowhere near the demographic for this event. I was there because Professor Alderman, the same one who had apparently been using my note-taking system as a teaching example without my knowledge, had recommended me for a student research assistant position connected to one of the donor-funded initiatives, and the recommendation required a brief introduction at the event. I wore my best outfit, which was a dark green dress I had bought secondhand 2 years ago that still fit well and looked intentional. And I stood in this room full of people who had more money than I would see in my lifetime, and I ate the genuinely excellent food, and I shook hands with Professor Alderman's colleagues, and I was doing absolutely fine until I turned around with a small plate of appetizers and found myself facing Vivian Ashford. She was not what I expected. I had a mental image constructed from the fragments of things Dorothy had said and not said over months of sessions. I expected Richard Ashford in a different body. Cool. Polished, strategic. Someone built from the same material. Vivian was not that. She was in her late 40s, with Dorothy's cheekbones but warmer eyes, darker hair with silver threads running through it that she had clearly made no effort to address, and the bearing of someone who had been powerful long enough that they no longer needed to perform it. She was talking to a university administrator when I turned around, and she saw me over his shoulder, and her expression did something immediately, a small recognition, a shift. The specific look of someone who has been told about a person and is now seeing them for the first time. She excused herself from the administrator and came over to me. "You're Nora," she said. "I am," I said, because there was no point being otherwise. "I'm Vivian," she said. "Dorothy's mother." I held my plate of appetizers and thought about a lot of things very quickly. "Hello," I said. She smiled. It was a real smile, warm and direct and containing none of the social performance I associated with people at events like this one. "I know who you are," she said. Dorothy has told me. She paused, choosing words. More than she probably intended to over time. "Should I be concerned?" I said. "No," she said. "You should be." She paused again. "I think you should know something. And I'm telling you because Dorothy won't, because she doesn't know how, and because I think you deserve to know it." I put my plate down on a nearby table. "Okay," I said. "Dorothy saw your scholarship announcement," Vivian said. "Before the year started. In August. Her father had forwarded it to her. He had read your application essay, the foundation reviews, all the essays before selection, and he had flagged yours specifically. He told Dorothy that this girl had written the most honest application he had ever read. That it should be required reading." She paused. "He was very admiring. Richard doesn't admire easily." Dorothy knew that. I was very still. "She came to school already knowing your name," Vivian said, quietly. "Already knowing what you had come from and what you had done to get here." And instead of, she stopped. Something working in her expression. Something that looked like a mother's specific complicated pain. She made the choice she made. And I think part of her has been trying to understand why she made it ever since. I stood in that donor event with a room full of wealthy strangers around me, and I thought about the first day in the library. About the notebook being turned around. About the peanut butter sandwich. About the notes in the margins that said "Go home, scholarship girl." About the dean's office and the courtyard and the cold shower of systematic cruelty that had been my fall semester. And now I was being told it had started before I arrived. That she had known. That the bullying had not been the thoughtless social reflex of a privileged girl encountering a scholarship student. It had been a decision. Made in advance. By someone who already knew my name. "Why are you telling me this?" I said. My voice was very level. I was very proud of how level my voice was. "Because she's sorry," Vivian said. "In a way she doesn't have the architecture to fully express yet. And because sorry without context is incomplete." She looked at me steadily. "And because I am also sorry. For what happened in my daughter's first year that I didn't know about until recently." That's not sufficient, I know. But it's true. I looked at this woman who had Dorothy's cheekbones and none of Dorothy's walls, and I thought about Sister Margaret keeping a yellow blanket in a box under her bed without ever explaining why, and I thought about how people carry their caring in very different ways and not all of them look like caring from the outside. "Thank you," I said. "For telling me." She nodded. She picked up my plate of appetizers from the table and handed it back to me. "Eat something," she said. "The mushroom ones are excellent." I ate a mushroom one. She was right. It was excellent. I was having a minor internal earthquake, and the mushroom appetizer was genuinely helping, which felt like very on-brand information about me as a person. I left the event 20 minutes later, and I walked across campus in the February cold, and I found a wall, not a bench, a wall, the side of the library, the rough stone of it. And I put my back against it and slid down it until I was sitting on the ground with my knees up and my green secondhand dress around my legs and the cold coming through the stone behind me, and I sat there. She had known my name before I arrived. She had read about my life and then chosen to make it smaller. And she had been trying, in every sideways oblique make Tian don't comment on it way available to her, to unsay something she had said before we ever met. I sat on that ground for a while. Then my phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was Lena. I picked up. "Hi," I said. "Hi," she said. "How was the event? Are you okay? You sound like you're sitting on the ground." "I am sitting on the ground," I said. A short pause. "Outside. Against the library wall," I said. "It's February," she said. "I'm aware," I said. "I'm coming," she said, and hung up. She arrived 7 minutes later with her coat and a scarf she immediately wrapped around my shoulders without asking, and she sat down on the ground next to me against the library wall, because Lena Park will absolutely sit on frozen ground in February if that is where you are, which is one of approximately 47 things about her that make her impossible to take for granted. She didn't ask what happened right away. She just sat there with me in the cold, shoulder to shoulder, and let the quiet be what it was. After a while, I told her. I told her everything Vivian had said. All of it, in order, the way I process things linearly, with accurate detail, without editorializing until the end. Lena was quiet through all of it. When I finished, she pulled the scarf slightly tighter around my shoulders. She knew your name, Lena said. Yes, I said. Before you got here. Yes. And she still. Yes, I said. Another silence. Nora, Lena said. I need to tell you something too. Something in her tone made me turn and look at her. She was looking straight ahead, at the dark campus across from us, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. The night of the alley, she said. October 15th. I waited. I wasn't just passing by when I screamed, she said. I was behind you the whole time on Caldwell. I had been in a late study group. I was about 4 minutes behind you on the same route. She paused. I saw you stop at the alley entrance. I saw you put your bag behind the recycling bin. Another pause. I saw you go in. I stared at her profile. I was too scared to follow you, she said, and her voice was very controlled and very honest, which was the most Lena way to say a difficult thing. I stood at the entrance for what felt like a very long time, and I was too scared to go in, and I screamed instead. Because it was the only thing I could make myself do. She turned to look at me then. Her round eyes were bright with something. I've been ashamed of that since October. I never said anything because I was embarrassed that I didn't go in sooner. That I let you be in there alone for as long as you were. I looked at her face. At the honesty in it. At the courage it had taken to say that on the cold ground outside the library, while I was already in the middle of an emotional earthquake. Lena, I said. I know, she said. I should have. You saved me, I said. Whatever was happening between going in and screaming, the screaming saved me. The timing was exactly right. They ran because of you. But I was scared. Everyone was scared, I said. I was terrified. My plan was cartoon kung fu. We were all operating under significant fear. You did the thing you could do, and it was exactly enough. I looked at her. You're enough, Lena. You are always exactly enough. Her jaw tightened slightly. The bright thing in her eyes was doing something precarious. Don't make me cry on the ground in February, she said. I have a reputation to maintain. What reputation? I said. I'm working on it, she said. It's in development. I laughed. It came out slightly shaky, but it was real. She laughed too, and we sat on the frozen ground outside the library with a borrowed scarf between us and laughed in a way that had some crying in it, and some cold, and some relief, and some of the specific exhaustion that comes from carrying things you should have put down sooner. And it was one of those moments that you know while it's happening that you will remember it. The whole texture of it. The cold stone and the breath clouds and the laugh that had tears in it. We stayed there until the cold became genuinely impractical, and then we went inside. I need you to subscribe if you have not subscribed. Right now. Middle of the story. I know we're in the middle, but I need you to commit because what comes next is the part that is going to make you feel everything, and I need you in the room for it. Comment, I'm staying, so I know you're here. The scholarship letter arrived on a Thursday. I came back from class to find an envelope from the Hargrove University Office of Financial Aid in my mailbox. I stood in the mailroom with my bag on my shoulder, and I opened it with the specific careful calm of someone who has learned that financial correspondence should be read standing up so you can absorb whatever it contains without the fall being far. The letter informed me that the Hargrove Merit and Equity Scholarship Fund had recently undergone a routine financial review connected to an audit of associated endowment accounts, and that during this review my scholarship had been placed under temporary administrative hold. It then informed me that the hold had been resolved and my scholarship was fully reinstated with no interruption to my funding. I read the letter twice. Then I read it a third time. Temporary administrative hold. Resolved. I went to the scholarship office that afternoon and I asked, very calmly and specifically, what had happened. The woman at the desk, who was not the same unsympathetic woman from freshman year, was actually quite helpful. She told me that the fund review had been complicated by the audit, but that a private resolution had been reached that secured the fund independently of the endowment account in question. She told me a donor had personally guaranteed the fund's continuation while the audit was resolved. Which donor? I said. She looked at her screen. She looked back at me. It's listed as anonymous, she said. But the legal paperwork was filed through Ashford Family Council. I stood at that counter for a moment. Thank you, I said. I left the office. I stood on the path outside the administrative building and I looked at the campus around me, the ivy buildings, the inaccessible fountain, the students walking between classes, and I thought about Dorothy Ashford going to her father. Dorothy, who had fought a very old and very established dynamic between herself and the man whose name was on the buildings, and had done it for me and had not said a word about it. I thought about the poem, the door, the hand on the wood, the not knocking. I thought about the fact that I was holding in one hand a story about a person who had chosen cruelty before we met, and in the other hand a story about a person who had chosen something else when it mattered, quietly, without telling me, without making it a transaction. And I thought about how people are not fixed. How the most important thing about a person is not who they were in their worst moment, but what direction they are moving in. Whether the vector is towards something better. I thought about that for a long time. Then I thought, I need to talk to Marcus. Marcus and I had developed, over February, the specific kind of friendship that forms when two people sit near each other in a class that requires emotional honesty and discover they can be honest with each other without consequences. We got coffee sometimes after the poetry elective. We talked about the poems and about other things. He was studying environmental law, which I learned the week after the Quinn's conversation with Dorothy, and which felt like the universe making a point in its particularly heavy-handed way. And he was perceptive and funny, and had no stake in any of my situations, which made him extraordinarily useful to talk to. I found him in the campus coffee shop, at a corner table, half of a sandwich and an open laptop in front of him. I sat down across from him without asking and put my elbows on the table and said, I need an outside perspective. He closed his laptop. Okay, he said. From someone who has no investment in the outcome, I said. Also okay, he said. I told him the situation. Not everything, some things were Dorothy's to tell, and not mine, but enough. The broad shape of it. The history, the change, the scholarship, the poem. The girl I was with and the girl I was trying to make sense of, and the fact that I could not fully separate those two things in my chest, and it was causing a structural problem. Marcus listened the way he always listened, fully, without performing attention, just actually present. When I finished, he took a drink of his coffee and was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something? He said. Yes, I said. When you think about Lena, he said, what do you feel first? I thought about it honestly. Safe, I said. Certain. Like the ground is where it's supposed to be. And when you think about Dorothy, he said. I thought about that honestly too. Like something is still happening, I said. Like a sentence that hasn't finished. Marcus nodded slowly. Those aren't the same feeling, he said. No, I said. Neither one is wrong, he said. They're just different things. That's not helpful, I said. I know, he said. You asked for a perspective, not a solution. The perspective is, you know exactly what both of these are. You've known for a while. The question isn't what they are. The question is what you're going to do with what they are. I looked at him. You're very annoying, I said. I know, he said pleasantly and reopened his laptop. I sat there for a moment. Then I said, thank you. Anytime, he said, already reading something. The mushroom pastry here is good, by the way. If you want something. I stared at him. Why does everyone keep recommending mushroom things to me this month? He looked up. What? Nothing, I said. Never mind. I got a mushroom pastry. It was good. I sat there and ate it and thought about sentences that hadn't finished. The confrontation, and I am using that word loosely because it was not confrontational in the traditional sense, it was more like a reckoning conducted by two people who were being very careful with each other, happened on a Wednesday evening in the third week of February. I had gone back to the library. Our library, third floor east window. Lena was at a study group, actual study group, I had verified, and I was at the table with my notes and the poetry anthology open to a page I had been staring at for 20 minutes without reading, and I was thinking. The poetry anthology. The course copy. The one that was shared. Something made me flip to the back pages where people sometimes tucked things. Notes, bookmarks, the detritus of a shared book. I flipped past the index, past the blank pages, and there was something there. A folded piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly. It was handwritten. Dorothy's handwriting, I knew it now from months of tutoring, from the margins of my notes, from the note she had written in her application that Professor Alderman apparently read to classes. Neat, deliberate, slightly forward-leaning. It was a poem. Not the workshop poem. A different one. Shorter. More compressed. The way things are when they have been thought about for a long time and reduced down to only what is necessary. It was about a girl who did a very stupid and very brave thing in a dark alley. It was about watching someone who had no reason to come back turn around and come back anyway. It was about the specific feeling of running, of being the person who runs while someone else stays, and what you carry afterward. What the debt of that feels like when the person who saved you doesn't know they saved you and doesn't know you know and goes on being who they are without needing anything from you for it. The last lines were 4 words. I am still running. I sat with that paper in my hands for a long time. The library was quiet around me. The east window was dark with evening. I folded the paper carefully. I put it in my notebook. I sat there and I thought about Dorothy Ashford, who had read my name in August and made a decision and spent a semester executing it, and then spent another semester trying to become someone who deserved to be in the same room as the decision she'd made. About whether transformation was real or whether it was just guilt with better posture. About whether it mattered. I thought about Lena, who had been there in the dark on Caldwell Avenue, too scared to go in, doing the only thing she could do, being exactly enough. Who sat on frozen ground in February without being asked? Who cataloged small preferences and showed up with the right crackers? I thought about what Marcus said. Safe and certain versus something still happening. The ground being where it should be versus a sentence that hasn't finished. I thought about St. Catherine's and the yellow blanket and Sister Margaret, and every morning I had woken up in a bed that was mine only by temporary permission, in a building that was home only by functional definition, and had decided to keep going anyway. I thought about what it had cost to get here, and what it meant to be here, and what I wanted it to mean going forward. And then Lena came in. She was early study group must have ended ahead of time, and she came to the table, and she put her bag down, and she looked at me, and she saw immediately that something had shifted. She was very good at reading me. Better than anyone had ever been. She sat down slowly. What happened? She said. I put my hand on the notebook where the folded poem was. I looked at her. I need to tell you something, I said. Okay, she said. I told her about the poem. I took it out and I put it on the table, and I told her where I found it and what it said. I was honest about what it made me feel. I was completely honest because she deserved complete honesty, and because I had been carrying the incomplete version too long already. When I finished, Lena looked at the folded poem on the table for a long moment. She didn't pick it up. I have to ask you something, she said. Yes, I said. And I need you to answer honestly, she said. Not the answer that protects my feelings. The actual answer. I know, I said. She looked at me. Do you have feelings for her? The word feelings was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and we both knew it. I looked back at her. I thought about what honesty owed to people who deserved it. Something, I said carefully. Something that I can't name completely yet. Something that I don't think is simple. Lena absorbed that. She was very still. And us, she said. Something real, I said immediately. Something certain. Something I chose deliberately and would choose again. She was quiet for a long moment. The library settled around us, the old wood and the lamplight and the dark east window. I'm not going anywhere, she said finally. But I need you to hear me clearly. She looked at me with round dark eyes that were absolutely steady and absolutely serious. I can love you through complicated. I can be patient through uncertain. What I cannot do is be the safe option while you stand at a door trying to decide whether to knock. The door. The poem. The door. Lena, I said. I mean it, she said. Not as an ultimatum. As a truth. I deserve to be someone's first choice. Not the fallback. You're my first choice, I said. Then act like it, she said. Not harshly. Clearly. I looked at her. At the person who had shown up in every moment that mattered, who had handed me a charger in a dark alley, who had sat on frozen ground in February because that was where I was, who had just told me the hardest truth she could tell me with completely steady eyes. You're right, I said. I know, she said. And then, because she was Lena and because this was us, she reached across the table and took my hand. And she said, also, I ate your dinner while I was waiting for study group to start, and I'm not sorry. Lena, I said. It was a very good sandwich, and you were taking too long, she said. I stared at her. Those were my last 2 pieces of bread. I know, she said, and she was smiling now, small and real and containing everything, and I was smiling too, because that was what we were, this specific mixture of honest and ridiculous and warm, and I held her hand across the table and I thought, this is what certain feels like, and certain is not nothing, certain is in fact everything. The Dorothy situation resolved itself the following week in a way I did not engineer and did not predict. It resolved in the hallway outside the poetry elective, after a session in which I had read my alley poem aloud in workshop. Dr. Osei had called it the week's best piece. The class had been quiet in the specific way that happens when something real lands in a room. Marcus had nodded once from the back. Dorothy had sat in the second row and been very still through the whole reading and had not looked at me directly after. I came out into the hallway and Dorothy was there, waiting, which she had not done before. She looked at me. The poem, she said. Was that? Yes, I said. You knew the whole time, she said. Who it was in the alley. Since the coffee shop, I said. The jacket. She absorbed that. Why didn't you say anything? You weren't ready, I said. And I wasn't sure what to do with it. She looked at me for a long moment. The scholarship, she said. I know, I said. My father and I had, she paused. It was not a pleasant conversation. I imagine not, I said. I didn't do it first, she stopped. I wasn't trying to. I know, I said again. She looked at me with the full expression. The real one. All the way open, no performance layer, nothing managed or calculated. Just Dorothy, looking at me in a hallway. I found your poem, I said. In the anthology. Something moved through her face. I left it there by accident, she said, which was such an obvious lie that I actually had to work to keep my expression neutral. Sure you did, I said. Her jaw worked. Nora. Dorothy, I said. Gently. Firmly. I know what you feel. I think I've known for a while. And I need you to hear me clearly. I looked at her steadily. There is a person who sat on frozen ground in February, because that's where I was. Who showed up in every moment before she had any reason to. Who told me hard truths with steady eyes. I paused. I choose her. I choose her deliberately and completely. And that is not going to change. Dorothy was very still. But, I said, and her eyes moved slightly, a very small involuntary attention. What you are doing, the person you are becoming, that matters. It matters outside of what it has to do with me. Whatever you did at the beginning of this year, you are not that person right now. And I need you to know that I see that. Not for me. Just, I see it. She looked at me for a long time. The hallway was quiet. Students moved past us unconcerned. That's not enough, she said. Her voice was very controlled. What you're offering? No, I agreed. It's not. I know that. And you're okay with that, she said. I'm honest with that, I said. Which isn't the same as okay. But it's what's true. She looked at me. Something resolving in her expression. Something that was grief and also clarity, and also, underneath both of those, something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it, the specific feeling of a thing being named and therefore able to be carried differently. Okay, she said. Okay, I said. We stood in the hallway for another moment. Then Marcus came out of the classroom and looked between us and said, with perfect terrible timing, "Are you two having a moment? Because I can go get coffee and come back." Dorothy looked at him. I looked at him. We both looked back at each other. And Dorothy Ashford, the most composed person I had ever encountered, made a sound that was actually, technically, a small laugh. It was the most surprising thing that had happened to me all semester. And given the semester I was having, that was saying something. Marcus looked extremely pleased with himself. "Coffee," he said. "Fine," said Dorothy, in the tone of someone who has decided to be a slightly different person and is starting now. We got coffee. All three of us. It was extremely strange, and also somehow exactly right in the way that things are when they arrive at the shape they were always trying to reach. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was in my mailbox at Hendricks Hall when I came back from class, a standard white envelope, unremarkable except for the return address. St. Catherine's Home for Children, rural Ohio. I stood in the mailroom and looked at this envelope for a long time. I had not received mail from St. Catherine's since the Christmas card Sister Agnes sent every year with the group photo of current residents, the annual reminder that the place existed and continued and that I was no longer in it. This was not Sister Agnes's handwriting. The name in the top left corner of the return address was not a name I recognized. It was a woman's name, Margaret Okonkwo. That was not any of the sisters I had known. I took the letter to my room. I sat on my bed. I opened it carefully. Inside was a shorter letter, handwritten, from Margaret Okonkwo, who identified herself as the current administrator at St. Catherine's following Sister Margaret's passing. She wrote that she had been going through Sister Margaret's personal effects, which had been carefully stored after her death. She wrote that among these effects she had found something that had been set aside with a note attached, a note in Sister Margaret's own handwriting that said this belongs to Nora and should reach her when she is ready. Inside the envelope, folded together with Margaret Okonkwo's letter, was a second envelope. Older. The paper slightly yellowed at the edges. On the front of the second envelope, in Sister Margaret's handwriting, was my name. Just my name. Nora. I held both envelopes in my hands for a long time. Lena had been in the room when the letter arrived. She had been studying on my floor, which had become a normal occurrence, the floor of my small Hendricks room being where she ended up on evenings when the library felt too public. And she looked up from her textbook and saw my face and said nothing. She just moved to sit beside me on the bed, and she put her hand on my back, between my shoulder blades, steady and warm. "It's from St. Catherine's," I said. "Okay," she said. "Sister Margaret left me something," I said. "Okay," she said again. I opened the older envelope. Inside was a photograph. A single photograph, small, the kind taken on a phone and printed at a drugstore, slightly faded. It showed two people. One was Sister Margaret, younger, maybe 40, standing outside the door of St. Catherine's in the morning light. Beside her, holding something, was a woman I had never seen before. The woman was young, mid-20s, medium height, warm medium brown skin, and large dark almond-shaped eyes, and an expression that I recognized with a shock that went through me like cold water, because it was my expression. The particular one I made when I was trying to hold something carefully. Exactly my expression, on a face I had never seen. She was holding a yellow fleece blanket. Behind the photograph was a folded note in Sister Margaret's handwriting. 4 sentences. Her name was Claire. She was 17 when you arrived and 23 when she finally came back to ask about you. I told her you were extraordinary and that she should be very proud. I kept this so that when you were ready, you would know that you were not left by someone who didn't love you. I sat on my bed in Hendricks Hall with a photograph of my mother in my hands, and I was absolutely silent for a very long time. Lena's hand stayed on my back. She didn't say anything. She didn't try to fill the silence. She just stayed. And I looked at the woman in the photograph, at my eyes in a stranger's face, at the yellow blanket, at the door of St. Catherine's in the morning light, and I felt 20 years of a very specific kind of grief rearranging itself in my chest. Not going away. Rearranging. Into something that had different weight and different shape. Something that had an answer in it, even if the answer only opened more questions. She came back. She came back at 23 and Sister Margaret told her I was extraordinary. She had been looking at me from a distance too, maybe. Standing at a door. Not knocking. For different reasons than Dorothy's, from a different kind of shame, but standing there. And Sister Margaret had kept a photograph and a note and a yellow blanket in a box under her bed for 20 years because she believed that I would need to know this. That I deserved to know this. After a while I turned to Lena and I showed her the photograph. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. Then she put both arms around me and held on, and I let her, and I did not cry exactly, but something released in me that had been held for a very long time. Something that had been standing at attention since the day I learned to understand that nobody was coming, and it stood down, finally, because someone was here, and because the story I thought I knew about myself had just gotten a different ending. Not a resolution. Not a tidy bow. A door, left slightly open. Possibly for the first time. I sat in Lena's arms in my small Hendricks Hall room and I thought, I have a name. My mother's name is Claire. She came back once and Sister Margaret told her I was extraordinary, and she has no idea what I've become since. And then, because I am who I am, because 20 years of Sister Margaret's cold showers and unseasoned oatmeal had built a very specific kind of person, I thought, I should write that down. I'm going to write a poem, I said, into Lena's shoulder. Lena made a sound that was half laugh, half something else entirely. Of course you are, she said. It's for the assignment, I said. It's for you, she said, exactly the way I had said it to Dorothy about the workshop poem. Both, I said. Both things can be true. She held on a little tighter. Both things can be true, she agreed. Outside the window of my small room, the February campus was dark and cold and exactly the same as it had been yesterday and was going to be tomorrow. The fountain nobody sat near. The ivy buildings. The dining hall with its experimental scrambled eggs. The library with its third-floor east window and its warm lamplight, and the table where 3 girls had been sitting all semester working out who they were to each other. I am Nora. I grew up at St. Catherine's and I came to Hargrove with 1 suitcase and a cracked phone and cartoon kung fu and $42, and I have survived the fall semester and the spring semester and a love triangle and a corporate environmental cover-up and a scholarship review and a poem in an anthology and a photograph in an old envelope. I have one friend who shows up with the right crackers and another who is learning, very slowly and at significant personal cost, how to knock on doors. And somewhere in rural Ohio there is a woman named Claire with my eyes, and she came back once, and a nun who kept blankets in boxes thought she should know I was extraordinary. I don't know what I'm going to do with that yet. I have some ideas. I have a name and a photograph and the specific terrifying freedom of a door left open. But first I have a poem to write. Dr. Osei said the assignment was the thing you never said out loud. The raw version. The one in the room you don't usually invite visitors into. I think I finally know what's in there. I think it's been waiting a while. Stay for part 3. Because I am going to find Claire. And Lena is going to be there when I do. And Dorothy Ashford, who is doing the right thing with a USB drive and a very uncomfortable relationship with her father, and a poem she left in a shared anthology by accident, is going to do something in part 3 that I did not expect. That nobody expected. That makes every single thing that came before it make a different kind of sense. Like this video if you're still here. Subscribe if you aren't already. And drop a comment that just says her name is Claire, because I need to see that in the comments. I need to know you were here for this moment. I need to know you felt it. Because she came back once. And I think it's time I found out what happened after.